Hey, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I hear you. How's it
Okay.
going?
Going well, thanks.
Good. Long
Thanks.
time.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been
Yeah.
absolutely been a while.
I like your background.
Yeah, I'm flying over Miami Beach in my helicopter.
I see it. What is that? Lagos Golf Course or
Yeah,
Miami Beach?
yeah, it's sort of like
Lagos.
mid-beach and
Yeah.
believe it or not, that was actually there. I was asking a guy just out of the top of my head 10 years ago or so. He was doing aerials. He says, "Oh, I'm going over there. I'll just tack it on." And he did all these aerial shots for me. So I've got these like original pictures that are pretty cool.
That
So
one is great. That one's great. I almost see my house.
well, I think I could see Russia from here.
Oh,
So
it's funny. It's funny. Good.
well,
Good.
well, well, thanks for being on my show. It's called Miami Beach Lifestyle. Just launched it, several days ago. So I'm glad you
I'm
could be on here.
happy to be here. Thank you.
So I'm just going to introduce you to our audience or our future
Sure.
audience. Um, so Michael Tobin is a lawyer who was admitted to the Florida bar in 1992, and he leads a successful real property law firm and has created a company culture centered around caring for the needs of its clients and has employees that are invested in this mission, which allows him to provide great benefit and value with the experience and expertise to back it up. His focuses primarily on real property transactions and disputes, both residential and commercial, and includes significant work as a title insurance agent. Michael works with a large number of banks and mortgage lenders, and he also handles probate and estate matters. Michael also constantly draws on his past legal experiences and his large network of contacts in both the legal and related real estate industries to help his clients resolve their legal issues. After passing the bar in 1992, Michael worked as an associate for Rosenberg and Rothman, PA. And just 2 years later, he and Michael Rothman partnered to form Rothman and Tobin, PA, which after 22 successful years evolved into Tobin and Associates, PA, upon Mr. Rothman's retirement from private practice. Mike frequently lectures for real estate brokers, lenders, and young attorneys on matters of real property law. He's extensively involved in the broader legal and real estate communities and is an active member of the real property probate and trust law section of the Florida Bar. He's also past chairperson of the 11th Judicial Circuit Florida Bar Grievance Committee. That's a mouthful. Current president of the North Dade and the Beaches Real Estate Council and chairman of the board of the Miami Beach Jewish Community Center. So, uh, again, glad to have you. And I'm just curious, how did you get started in your business or in law?
Uh, I think I probably got started. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for that introduction. It's been a long time since I've heard all that. It makes me sound old. I guess I would say what started me on the path was law school, and graduated law school in '92, which was not a high flying time for South Florida real estate, that's for sure. And I got a job with a small firm. That firm did some real estate, some banking, a lot of banking. And after my boss passed away, my partner, or my then boss, became my partner, Michael Rothman. And as you said, um, really just day by day over a long period of time, just doing the work. So I would say, law school led me to where I am. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know I'd develop a passion for real property law. I didn't know that such a passion could exist,
Hmm.
but strangely enough, it does.
Yeah, it was I mean, I remember coming down South Florida visiting friends or staying with visiting with friends. Their parents had houses down here or condos. And I remember, yeah, the early 90s, like South Beach was barely on the map. It was kind of a war zone.
I was
So
going to say, if it was on the map, it wasn't for the right reasons usually.
Yeah, it was really, really, interesting. Very, not that many people were, um, at that time, I guess, invested, especially in the 90s and South, Miami Beach, not so much Miami Beach, I guess South Beach real estate, especially.
For
Uh,
sure. Back then, Michael, I vividly remember anything over $250,000 was considered a big deal.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Did you see any of those deals where the buyer opens up his briefcase and just puts the cash on the table?
Funny enough, there have been times where buyers have said to me, you know, that first it'll be a cash contract, which of course doesn't mean cash, but they'll say, instead of wiring you, I'm just going to bring the funds to closing or the cash to close or something. And the first time they said it, I'm like, all right, fine. And he's like, well, we'll need a little extra time to count it. I'll get there an hour early. I'm like, oh no, we don't do that. We don't do that. So yes, it's happened.
Wow. And now I guess the new thing is Bitcoin. Have you done any transactions with Bitcoin?
I have not, but it's a very good question. There's been a lot of talk about it in Miami real estate. I think that there's been very few actual transactions. There's just a lot of risk involved, primarily the time between contract and closing, the executory period. Bitcoin could dive, in half, and the parties transaction could be a lot different, from what they thought it was,
Hmm.
if because you're trading in Bitcoin. So if the Bitcoin goes down, your seller's really kind of, screwed. And if it goes up, the buyer's paying more in Bitcoin than they thought. So it doesn't happen much. There's also a lot of regulation still to come. So it's happening, but I haven't closed any, and they're not really being done on a broad basis, I would say.
Yeah, maybe when there's some really formal, strict regulation, it might happen. But yeah, I just wondered. I've heard, definitely some talk about it. And every once in a while I read that some real estate transaction was closed with Bitcoin. Um,
Same, but I haven't seen it. I've had people ask, but I haven't had one yet.
so what do you find are the most some of the most common problems that you solve for your clients or that you kind of prepare them for?
Um, I think that sometimes people aren't cognizant of what a landmine of, bad things are out there in the real estate world in South Florida. It's a very aggressive, very competitive place. There's a lot to kind of watch out for. And that's even if you're dealing with, people in good faith and good people. So I think, from a transaction standpoint, our involvement tends to kind of, I would say, protect the buyer from beginning to end. If we're involved in the contract stage, we're going to review contract provisions in a way that's aligned with the buyer if we represent the buyer, the seller. We're going to explain some things that maybe they weren't aware of and needed to be aware of. As the contract progresses, we're going to ensure that they're protected in terms of products. Is the title good? Are there open permits, code violations? Are there other types of things that they should be aware of? And then if there are those things, we're going to help them navigate the waters to their best interests. So it's in a transaction sense, it's really kind of um, navigating waters. In a dispute sense, because we do a lot of transaction work, I do real property disputes, I'm able oftentimes to kind of know where things are going to settle. But instead of them taking hours or days in a closing being worked out, disputes, in legal battles, if you involve the courts, it's going to be months. But for the most part, knowing debt, contract, real estate issues is going to help people even in disputes more so than an attorney they hire who isn't versed in real estate. So I would say that's really where we're of the most value to our clients, is just navigating.
But like when talk about disputes, like what are the most common real estate disputes that you run into?
Far and away, probably the most common would be buyer-seller disputes under a standard as is residential FAR bar contract. You know, whether they're parties looking to get out for some other reason, whether they're unable to perform for some reason, contingencies have passed, money's at risk. There's workouts to be had, whether you're a buyer or a seller. Because of the nature of escrow, you know, the escrow agent is holding the money for one of three things. Number one, a closing, where it goes and closes and disperses. Number two, a signed mutual release, which is not always easy to get. Or number three, a court order. So that escrow money, even though it may seem clear that something's happened, if the other side isn't in agreement, there's going to be a dispute. So FAR bar as is contracts, number one. Secondly, I would say foreclosures oftentimes, you know, would probably be the second most common. But then again, there's just a handful of disputes that, you know, involve lien theory, involve title priority. So, you know, real property is such a big asset class, you'd be surprised how many things can be disputed.
Yeah, I guess because you and I've talked about this a few times, but I find that sometimes the buyers don't, they feel, well, maybe I could just use a title company. I mean, you also do title, but they don't always foresee the need for hiring a real estate attorney. And that's sort of, I mean, I know, and because you've done a number of transactions, that a certain percentage of them run into problems. And but and they're usually, the buyers either are very smart or think they're very smart, and they don't want to they don't feel the need to pay the extra expense. And so I guess that's um what do you how do you advise buyers like that?
It is kind of interesting. I think that, and this goes back, you know, I've been doing this 30 years. It's always been this way. Um, it's a very real estate agent dominated market. You know, in some areas, you won't have a contract executed without the attorney review. The brokers will broker it, and then it'll go to the attorneys for documentation, you know, preparation of contract, signature, execution. Oftentimes here, we get the contracts after everything has been negotiated and signed. So, you know, I think, you know, we'll have a lot of clients who will want us to review the contract before it's signed, which is pretty logical. I think that what you're talking about is, you know, somebody saying, well, an attorney hasn't been involved up till now and the contract signed, I've placed escrow, what do I need an attorney for? But you're right, for something that's not so crazy in price, if your attorney's doing the title, you want your attorney controlling the money. You want them controlling the paper, because really at the end of the day, all a closing is if you're a buyer, it's money for paper, and if you're a seller, it's paper for money. So, you know, if you can get your attorney holding the money, holding the paper, holding all of the controls, and then you know someone protecting you, hired by you, that's a worthwhile thing. That's a real value thing. But you may not realize it when everything's fine. But there's generally a time in the closing where you're like, whew, I'm glad it's my attorney, you know, who's saying calling the shots.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was involved in a real estate closing, uh, but as a client, as a seller, and in New York City, and I was not, I didn't realize how much involvement the attorneys have there in writing the contract, even though it looked like boilerplate to me for the most part. But there was a lot of negotiating between attorneys before it really even got to the real estate brokers. So I wonder, maybe depending on what state you're coming from, you'll maybe, New York, they might expect it.
It's interesting because, somebody told me years ago, real estate is so local. And it's true, all of our county and states, there's a course of doing business, there's just an expectation level, and then you leave to another state and it's completely different. So that those local customs, you know, it's hard to change them. Like I said, it's been this way for 30 years. In New York, it's an attorney dominated industry. And as a result, things move slower. So we'll often have times where New York buyers, and sellers aren't used to the speed of the transaction. The other thing is in New York, most contracts are not time of the essence. In Florida, contracts are time of the essence. So
Hmm.
it's a hard date. In New York, you've got usually 30-day leeway. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, no, I noticed that as well. Um, what what would you say? I mean, we kind of covered this, but like what would you say are some myths or misconceptions about real estate law that you see that stop people from properly utilizing your services and taking advantage of your experience?
Well, like we said, I would say the what I would call a misconception that you hire an attorney, it's going to get more complicated, that they're going to look for problems, that it's going to, that as a result of an attorney's involvement, things are going to go sideways. I think that's a real misperception. It's not the attorney's job to put the kibosh on the deal. There's no reason that an attorney would want to do that. Generally, we get paid when it closes like anyone else. We don't have any incentive to kill deals. It's not good for our reputation. It's not good, for business. But there's this misperception that I think that, you hire an attorney, it's just going to get too complicated. You hire a title company and it won't. And oftentimes those title companies are just attorney owned anyway.
Hmm.
And they just market. I've always wanted to be a real estate attorney that writes title insurance rather than a title agent who wants to, who happens to be an attorney. And there are a lot of things that come up where I add a ton of value. So I can't worry anymore about, why it is that way, but it's just always been. And I think it's just a misconception that, you change, case by case.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What would you say is, what was one of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome, in the real estate profession, a real estate law profession?
I would say probably professionally, I had two seminal moments. When my boss died when I was 26, I had been an
Hmm.
attorney for 2 years. Um, the decision for his partner and I to form a partnership was just quick. There wasn't a lot of thought, and it turned out to be, a great thing. And then when he retired 5 years ago, it was a real adjustment as well. Those would be the main events. I would say that, market ups and downs, hurricanes, and the resulting crises and dilemmas and uncertainty. But for the most part, I'm a big believer that, you just put your head down and kind of just do
Hmm.
your work and the rest will fall into line. I also started at a time when it was much slower. So there wasn't an expectation, there wasn't everything wasn't as high stakes. So it gave me time to kind of grow into my profession, which I'm appreciative for.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. What would you, is there any specific advice that you would give, um, other than hiring you, uh, buyers that are thinking about buying real estate here? Um, and sellers, like, are there things that they should do, in terms of legality or to prepare themselves ahead of time?
I would say legality wise, have someone who you trust, who's a good, um, good, who's got their finger on the pulse of the market, who knows what they're doing from a legal standpoint. Probably more importantly, though, if you're thinking of buying and selling, would be really to get to know the market. Find an agent who can really show you the market in a way that is consistent with what you're looking for. If you're looking to sell, understand, what's being sold, what prices they're being sold at, what the wait times are, what the market's like for financing. And if you're a buyer, make sure, you're finding the right property, if it's a residence, if it's a second home, if it's investment, I would really educate yourself on the market, and I still believe that even though, every industry is changing, that, the value of a good real estate agent, broker, is tremendous. There's a lot of people who similarly, like what we were talking about, with attorneys, that they won't want to get in a broker. They'll want to list for sale by owner or, somehow, put it on the MLS through something. I don't think there's any replacement yet for good, knowledgeable market participants with good ethics and good, um, you know, reputations. I
Mm.
really still believe in that. It's a very, you know, crazy moving world, but I still think that, those fundamentals still matter.
Yeah, it comes down to I guess really who you trust, and relationships, and who you feel comfortable with. Yeah, and we're dealing with sometimes very large assets.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
are you seeing any increase in foreclosures at this time? Do you seeing much increase?
It's interesting. I was just talking with someone about that today. A client from New York kind of asked me the same thing. There's been a bunch of high-profile commercial foreclosures, but those have been more isolated. I have not, and I've got a few clients who've gotten served with residential for one reason or the other. Um, but no, it's not anything that right now we're seeing in waves because prices are still high. If anyone had any issue paying, there'd be almost no reason they wouldn't be able to sell and pay off the loan. If people really don't know what they're doing and they kind of bury their head in the sand, then yes. But even then, foreclosures with equity are easy to solve. You just sell the property. I
Right,
don't think people realize how much time you have, even in foreclosure where you can sell the property and just pay off the debt prior to judgment.
Mm, mm.
So, but we're not seeing them in mass.
Yeah, well, I guess that's good, I think.
That's a
Depending on
good
how you look
question.
at it, unless you're
Yes,
a distressed buyer.
right.
Um, what impact have you seen with the the Surfside collapse? How have you seen that affect, the market and legal issues, especially obviously with condominiums?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was so traumatic that the first couple weeks, I'll remember clearly, I was away and I was getting calls where a lot of people wanted to back out of contracts for older buildings. They were really panicking. That panic really subsided quickly. Um, I think it's very much and should be a part of buyer's due diligence. Um, and I think that the biggest impact is going to be the legislation that recently passed that's going to require much stricter um, recertification requirements, communication and disclosure requirements from condos and reserves. So I think Florida's got a real it's been written about a lot, but I think there's a real insurance crisis looming. And I think that older buildings are going to have some issues, in terms of the recertification, in terms of the reserves. It's probably not going to go into effect for a year. It's probably not something we're really going to see much of for another year or two, but it will be a big thing.
Like when you say issues, are you talking about in terms of being able to fund the assessments and it's not just the assessments, it's the maintenance that's required to bring the building up to code and meet safety standards. Is that more about what you're referring to in terms of the issues?
David, it's probably going to be, sorry, Michael, it's probably going to be,
That is my middle name though, so you're
yeah,
half right.
I don't know. It felt like a David for a second.
Okay.
But I think it's going to be all that and more.
Mm.
It's going to ultimately probably affect mortgage financing on older buildings. I would think that it's a good possibility that the Fannie and Freddie condo questionnaires will talk in terms of reserves and require certifications. I think the insurance costs that are coming are going to throw maintenance um, fees way up. And then yes, I think that there will likely be a lot of special assessments, for older buildings who don't have the reserves needed to do the work required.
Is it true, because I'm not sure about this, that the newer buildings built in the last several years, I'm not sure what year, if it actually started, that there's a mandatory requirement for a certain amount of reserves?
There's a statutory requirement for all buildings currently to have reserves, but they can be overridden, they can be waived by vote of the association, and that happens a lot. If you're a newer building, you won't have the obligation of complying with this recertification, rules of the county that are in place for older buildings. You'll still have to have reserves, but you won't have I think it's currently 40 and 50, but I think that the legislation will change it to 30 year recertifications. And that's really a big deal for these buildings because sometimes those are hard to get.
Right. Yeah. The what a lot of people are retiring here, moving down here, their parents down here. What things do you focus on in terms of helping people prepare for their future or their parents' future in terms of planning ahead? What kind of advice do you give them from a legal standpoint?
So yeah, we do a bit of estate work. We'll do estate planning and estate administration, trust and estate administration. In those cases, I've served as a trustee and a fiduciary for clients, who I've known for a while. And then that's on the administration side. And then on the planning side, we will do pretty basic estate planning documents: a will, a trust, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare surrogate, and a living will. So those are really kind of the basics. So a lot of times when you buy a house, it's a good reminder, that you need, some basic estate planning. If it becomes a little more complicated, I'll refer them on to real specialists in that area.
Okay, great. So what questions or stories did we not talk about that would be important or interesting?
Oh God. I don't know. I feel like we've covered a lot. Questions or what'd you say?
Or
Stories?
stories, some any amusing, entertaining stories.
Oh, we've had lots of them over the years. For a long time, we used to have a Hall of Fame list where, we would, and that would kind of be internal because we'd have attorney-client, but, we've had, a nice list of some celebrities um, we've had to, we've represented. we've done some closings in really, really crazy places, boats and airplanes and, and Starbucks and you name it. Real estate's a crazy thing, it's especially in Miami, so much of it is crazy, but yet you feel like, okay, it's just second nature because I've been doing this, like, so I don't really have any crazy stories right now, but we've
Or
done
none
some
that you can talk about.
for sure, none that I can talk about or want to talk about
Yeah,
here.
right.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so the stories, some of them are in the Hall of Fame or the Hall of Shame.
exactly. That's exactly right. We
So,
prefer the Hall of Fame.
so besides practicing law, what other what any interesting hobbies that you have, or what are you particularly passionate about?
Um, I like to spend a lot of time with my family. I like to be home. I'm also a very big sports and music fan. So I like to go to concerts. I like to go to sporting events. I like the water. I like to exercise. And then I just like to chill and do nothing as well. I'd like a little more travel time. I'm sure my wife would like a little more travel time as time goes on, but we've been busy, but I'm hopeful for some good travel time as well.
Okay, well, great. That's great. I'm glad we got to spend some time together, and thank you for your insights.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was good. Thanks for having me, and it was a good time.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
You're
See you
welcome. Bye,
soon.
bye,
Take care.
Michael.
Bye-bye.